I never thought I would find myself here, trapped in a web of lies and deceit. I wasn't looking for an affair, yet here I am, caught in a dangerous triangle. And it all started with one shared secret. I'm not someone who ever imagined they'd fall into the trap of infidelity. That thought was for other people, people who had more chaotic lives, less control over their emotions. Yet here I am, at 45, caught in a situation that I can't escape. Not that I haven't tried. No one ever plans for these things. It happens when you least expect it. It happens when you're vulnerable, and I, unfortunately, had been that way for far too long. It all began when I met Mark. He wasn't much different from my husband, Chris. They both worked in corporate, both had a presence about them. But Mark, he saw something in me that others didn't. He noticed the small cracks I'd been hiding. It started innocently enough, a conversation here and there. We shared a deep connection, something I had never shared with anyone else before. And then it happened. One late afternoon, after a particularly difficult day at work, I let my guard down. I confided in Mark, something that I hadn't told anyone, not even Chris. That secret, that moment of raw vulnerability, became the bond that tied us together. Looking back, I should have seen the danger, but I was too caught up in the feeling of being understood. It was only supposed to be a conversation. Just one conversation. But Mark took that shared secret and manipulated it into something else. Something more. It was harmless at first. At least, that's what I told myself. We started meeting more often, talking late into the night, and then, without realizing it, I was emotionally invested in him. I thought I could control it, that it wouldn't go further. But it did. And with every passing day, I felt myself sinking deeper into a place I couldn't escape from. Now, I'm here, facing the wreckage. I never wanted an affair, yet I find myself trapped between the guilt of what I've done and the fear of what will happen if I end it. What if I destroy everything? The weight of the situation grows heavier every day. Chris, my husband of 18 years, is a good man. He's in his early 50s, kind-hearted, but so busy with work that I thought he wouldn't notice the shift in me. He's always been there, providing for our family, trying his best. But lately, I haven't felt the connection I once had with him. I don't know when it started slipping, but it did. And that's when I became vulnerable. Mark, my ex-lover, in his early 50s has become my emotional crutch in a way, even though he's also the very reason I'm in this mess. The affair was never planned, but it grew and became this impossible thing. How did I let this happen? How could I be so careless? Now I'm here, stuck. Torn between the love I've had for Chris, the man I married, and the emotional turmoil Mark has brought into my life. I don't know how to break free, but I know one thing for sure, no matter what happens, someone is going to get hurt. And I fear that the worst part is that I may never truly recover from this. As I sit here, reflecting on everything, I wonder, what if I had never shared that secret? What if I had been stronger? But now, the past can't be undone. The damage is done. And I'm just trying to figure out how to navigate through the mess I've made. Thank you all my viewers and listeners. As the story continues, I'll explore the manipulation that led me deeper into this affair, the struggle to regain control over a situation I never wanted to be in. To encourage me to go on, please click on your like button below, comment your thoughts on this question. How do you walk away from something when the consequences feel too great to bear? Most importantly, tap on your subscribe button below and click on all to get notified as I continue my story. Looking back, I can see how Mark's influence on me grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it didn't feel like manipulation, it felt like care. It felt like attention, the kind of attention I hadn't realized I was craving. There are moments in life when we're vulnerable, when the cracks in our emotional armor make us susceptible to things we never thought we'd fall for. That's how it was for me. Mark knew how to speak to me, how to understand the parts of me that were broken, that felt unseen in my own marriage. I had been carrying these burdens for so long, burdens of motherhood, work, and the weight of maintaining a perfect life. I wasn't unhappy with Chris, but I had started to feel like something was missing. Like I was disappearing under the layers of responsibilities, and I longed for someone to truly see me. Mark saw me in a way that I hadn't felt seen in years. It wasn't just that he paid attention to the small details, like the way I took my coffee or the books I liked to read, it was that he made me feel alive again. He made me feel like I mattered. But the more I shared with him, the deeper I got sucked into this emotional whirlpool. We talked about things I'd never shared with Chris. He listened in a way that felt like it meant something. But it wasn't just a friendship anymore. As I opened up to him, I felt myself becoming emotionally dependent. He didn't have to say much, his silence was enough to make me feel like I was the most important thing in his world. I started to confide in him more, started to trust him more. And that's where the manipulation began. It wasn't overt at first, it didn't feel like manipulation, but now I realized just how insidious it was. I didn't want to be caught up in an affair. I didn't go into this thinking, I'm going to destroy my marriage. But I was emotionally vulnerable, and Mark knew exactly how to exploit that. He didn't force me into it. He didn't have to. I was already halfway there. He just guided me to the point where I couldn't see an escape. I can still hear his words sometimes, in my head, it's just one night. It won't change anything. You're not the only one feeling this way. And just like that, I was convinced. I convinced myself it was nothing, that it wouldn't matter. It was just an escape. But that escape, once taken, had its consequences. And now, I can't go back. The emotional toll of it all is hard to explain. I didn't want to hurt Chris. He didn't deserve this. But I was trapped in something that I had let spiral out of control. The guilt eats at me, even as I tell myself that I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But it did. And now I have to face the consequences of my actions. Mark didn't just become my lover, he became my anchor, in a way. It wasn't about passion or excitement, it was about needing someone to lean on, someone to understand. But the problem was, I was leaning on the wrong person. And it's that weight, that constant tug-of-war inside me, that keeps me awake at night. I think about what I've done and wonder, could I have stopped it? Could I have walked away before it got so messy? What would my life look like if I had just been stronger, had never opened up to him? But now, there's no going back. I'm stuck in the middle of this mess, and the hardest part is figuring out how to free myself from it. Can I truly walk away from everything? From Mark? From the guilt? From the fear of losing my family? The truth is, I don't know. As much as I want to move on, the emotional bond I've built with Mark, through shared vulnerabilities, through trust, through that secret, isn't something I can easily forget. It's a bond that feels unbreakable, even though I know it's destroying me. And yet, I can't seem to find a way out. The day it all came crashing down is still fresh in my mind, like a film reel stuck in a loop, playing the same scene over and over again. There's no escaping it. I was caught in the act of betrayal, and as I sit here, reflecting on everything, I can't help but wonder if I had ever truly been in control of my life. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I had ever intended to do, but when you're caught up in something this tangled, you stop seeing the edges of the mesh you're making. You think you can get away with it, keep the balance, keep both worlds separate. But eventually, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. It happened one evening. Chris came home earlier than expected, and there he was, standing at the door, his face frozen in shock. I had just gotten off the phone with Mark, and my heart sank as I heard Chris's footsteps getting closer. The worst part wasn't the surprise, it was the realization that I'd been living a lie for months. I had been lying to myself, lying to Chris, and all for what? A momentary escape that had cost me everything? I remember the silence between us, thick and suffocating. I looked into Chris's eyes, and I saw the pain, the confusion, the disbelief. It was as though he was seeing me for the first time, someone he didn't recognize, someone he didn't know. I could see the question forming in his eyes, how could you do this to me? How could you betray me this way? But I couldn't answer him. I couldn't give him the truth, not in that moment. How could I? The weight of it all was too heavy. It was too much to explain. It wasn't just about an affair, it was about trust, about the years of our marriage, about everything we had built. And I had shattered it all in an instant. I don't know what to say, I whispered, my voice breaking, my throat closing up. I wanted to take it all back. I wanted to undo the choices I had made, but it was too late. There was no turning back. He had caught me. I could see his anger start to rise, but it wasn't the rage I had expected. It was worse. It was a quiet, deep hurt that cut through me like a blade. He didn't shout. He didn't throw accusations or curse me out. He just stood there, staring at me with eyes full of disbelief. And that look, that silent look, was the most painful thing I had ever experienced. The guilt that washed over me in that moment was suffocating. It wasn't just about the affair. It was the realization that I had hurt the person who had always been there for me. He had been a good husband. A supportive partner. And I had betrayed him. How could I live with that? But even as I stood there, facing the consequences of my actions, my thoughts kept drifting back to Mark. What had I done to get myself here? I hadn't wanted any of this. I had been looking for an emotional connection, someone who would understand me when Chris didn't. And yet, I had created this toxic mess, tangled in lies, guilt, and betrayal. Chris finally spoke, his voice low and controlled, but I could see the tremor beneath it. How long, he asked, his words piercing through the silence. How long has this been going on? I couldn't look him in the eye. The shame was overwhelming. I never wanted it to happen, I said, my voice trembling. It happened, and now I don't know how to fix it. His eyes hardened. You don't fix this. You can't just undo it, can you? He said bitterly, shaking his head. Do you even care what this does to me? To us? I wanted to tell him that I did care, that I was sorry, but my words felt hollow. How could I ever explain the complexities of what I had done? How could I explain that part of me had gotten lost in something I never intended to be a part of? But it wasn't just about Chris. It was about me too. How had I let this happen? Why had I allowed myself to get caught up in something so destructive? I was angry at myself, but I didn't know how to stop it. And now, as I faced the man I had hurt, I realized just how far I had fallen from the person I used to be. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and unyielding. I knew, in that moment, that everything had changed. No matter what happened next, our lives would never be the same. As the minutes passed, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me. I wasn't just caught in the act of cheating, I was caught in a life I no longer recognized. How could I have gone this far? Was the temporary escape worth the permanent damage? Even as Chris stood there, devastated, I couldn't help but feel an odd sense of relief. The truth was out. The secret was no longer mine to carry. But the price of that relief was steep. What would happen next? Could Chris ever forgive me? Could I ever forgive myself? And then, there was Mark. What about him? How did he feel now that the affair was exposed? Would he regret it all too, or had he been prepared for this moment from the start? Was he going to walk away, leaving me to deal with the mess I had created? The guilt, the shame, and the uncertainty were overwhelming. But in the midst of it all, one thing became clear, the truth had set me free in the worst way possible. Now, I had to face the consequences. The journey of infidelity, betrayal, guilt, regret, was far from over. But it was only just beginning to unravel. There's something almost surreal about watching your life unravel before your very eyes. When I look back, I can hardly recognize the woman I was just a few months ago. I was once in control, or at least I thought I was. I had everything in place, my marriage, my career, my family. But now, everything feels like it's slipping through my fingers. After Chris caught me, everything changed. We had so many conversations, most of which were silent moments of reflection where neither of us could find the right words. But what stood out most was his willingness to try and fix things. He didn't shout. He didn't throw me out. He didn't even ask for a divorce right away. Instead, he tried to understand. And I didn't know how to handle that. He asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer. Why, he'd ask. What was missing? What did he offer that I couldn't? What went wrong? I wanted to tell him the truth. That it wasn't just about Mark, that it wasn't about wanting something from him that I wasn't getting from Chris. It was about me, about feeling lost and overwhelmed, about trying to find a way back to myself. But I couldn't say it. Every time I tried to speak, the words felt like they would make it worse. Chris wasn't angry anymore. At least, not in the way I expected him to be. He was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of wondering who I had become. And I was tired too. Tired of carrying the guilt, the shame, the weight of it all. We tried therapy. Chris insisted. He said he wanted to understand me, to help me heal. But every session felt like a battle. I was fighting myself, trying to come to terms with what I'd done, while Chris was fighting his own demons, betrayal, heartbreak, and the fear of being left alone. We were both trapped in our own worlds of hurt, and no matter how much we tried to work through it, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just the therapy sessions. The entire atmosphere at home felt different. There was no longer any sense of peace. I could feel the distance growing between us, a silent gap that we couldn't seem to close. And I felt it every time I looked at him, every time I tried to reach out to him. We were two strangers living in the same house, each trying to survive a situation neither of us had signed up for. The hardest part was watching him go through the motions, pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. He wanted so badly to make things work, to rebuild, but it felt like we were both faking it. I could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the sadness, the pain. It was a pain I had caused, and yet, I couldn't find the words to take it away. I couldn't fix it. But here's where it got even harder. I could feel Mark's presence in every corner of my mind. He wasn't gone, not in the way I had hoped he would be. It wasn't just the affair itself, it was the emotional connection I had with him, the bond that seemed to linger even after everything had been exposed. I kept asking myself, why couldn't I just let go? Why did it still matter? Why couldn't I break free from the grip he had on me, even if I didn't want to? Chris had his own questions too. One evening, after another round of therapy, he asked me, "Do you still love him?" It was the question I had feared the most. And for the first time I didn't know how to answer. It wasn't a simple yes or no anymore. My feelings for Mark were complex. They weren't based on passion or excitement anymore. They were rooted in something deeper, something I couldn't fully explain. It was a connection that had been forged through shared vulnerability, through secrets we had exchanged, through a feeling of being understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. But love? Was it love? Or was it just a need to feel validated, a desire to escape the isolation I had felt for so long in my marriage? I couldn't answer. And that was the worst part. I didn't want to leave Chris. I didn't want to destroy everything we had worked for. But every time I thought about Mark, I felt a pull. Every time I tried to move forward, to rebuild, I felt like I was carrying the weight of this emotional baggage with me. And then there was the question that haunted me, why do people stay with cheaters? What was it that kept people, like me, in relationships that were broken, that were built on lies? I asked myself that every day. Was it love? Was it fear? Was it guilt? Or was it simply the weight of everything you had built together, the years of memories that made it impossible to walk away, even when you knew you should? For Chris, I think part of it was hope. Hope that things could get better, that we could rebuild. But for me, it was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of facing what I had done, fear of losing everything. I didn't know how to start over. I didn't know what life would look like without Chris, without the stability I had once taken for granted. And then, Mark's messages started again. It had been a few weeks since we had last spoken, but now he was reaching out, asking how I was doing. It was the last thing I needed, but it was also the thing I craved. I didn't want to go back to him. I knew I couldn't. But there was a part of me that still wanted to talk to him, to understand why we had fallen into this trap in the first place. I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo, trapped between my past and my future. I had to decide whether to stay with Chris, to try and rebuild, or to walk away from both of them and figure out who I was without either one of them in my life. It was the hardest decision I would ever have to make. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the affair itself. It wasn't the initial shock of being caught, or even the days and weeks that followed, filled with guilt, confusion, and questions that never seemed to have clear answers. No, the hardest part was the decision I had to make next. Chris and I had been through so much. We had tried therapy, we had talked for hours, we had cried, we had fought. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally broken between us. I didn't want to destroy our marriage, but I also couldn't ignore the emotional ties I had with Mark. I didn't want to hurt Chris any more than I already had, but the pull toward Mark was still there, lingering like a shadow I couldn't escape. I had tried to distance myself. I hadn't answered his messages, I hadn't called him. But every time I told myself I was done, every time I convinced myself that I wanted to work things out with Chris, I found myself thinking about Mark again. It was like I was caught in a cycle, unable to break free from the emotional roller coaster I had created. And then, one evening, after a particularly difficult session with our therapist, Chris asked me a question I had been dreading: "Do you still love him?" I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to say no, to convince both myself and him that I was over it, that I was ready to move forward. But the truth was more complicated. I didn't know what love was anymore. I had been so lost in the chaos of everything that I didn't know where my feelings began and where they ended. I loved Chris, but I had also loved the feeling of being understood by Mark, of having someone see me when I felt invisible to everyone else. But was that love? Or was it a desperate attempt to fill a void in me that had been growing for years? "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking. I could see the pain in Chris's eyes, and I couldn't bear to hurt him further, but the truth was too much to hide anymore. "I don't know what I feel. I thought I could fix this, but I don't know how." Chris was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that I wasn't expecting: "I still love you, even after everything. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, but I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had, if you're willing to try too." It was the last thing I had expected to hear. After everything, after the betrayal, after the affair, he still loved me enough to try and make it work. And part of me wanted that too. I wanted to move past the mess we had created, to find a way to rebuild our relationship. But I was torn. I couldn't deny the emotional connection I had with Mark, but I also knew that what I had with Chris was something worth fighting for. I didn't have an easy answer, and I still don't. But what I do know is that the road to healing is long, and there are no guarantees. I could stay with Chris and try to rebuild our marriage, or I could walk away and risk losing everything we had worked for. Neither option felt easy, but one thing was clear: I couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo, bouncing between the past and the future. The choice wasn't just about staying with Chris or leaving him. It was about facing myself, confronting the reasons why I had let myself get caught up in all of this, and deciding who I wanted to be moving forward. I had to ask myself, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be someone who runs away from the consequences of my actions, or do I want to face them, learn from them, and try to make things right? For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I realized that the only way forward was to take responsibility for my choices, to stop running from my mistakes, and to rebuild the trust one had broken. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I couldn't move forward without facing the damage I had caused. And so, I made a choice. I chose to stay with Chris. I chose to fight for my marriage, to try and heal the wounds I had caused. But it wasn't just about staying with him, it was about finding peace with myself. I had to let go of the emotional ties to Mark, even though that wasn't something I could do overnight. But I had to start somewhere. I had to let go of the past, of the mistakes I had made, and start building something new. I know this journey hasn't been easy, and it's not something I could have shared lightly. But sometimes, the hardest stories are the ones that need to be told. Thank you for taking the time to watch, to listen, and to reflect on the complexities of infidelity, guilt, love, and the difficult choices we all face in life. I hope this story has helped you understand that even in our darkest moments, we can still find a way to heal, to rebuild, and to move forward. Stay tuned for more stories coming next, and as always, thank you for being here with me on this journey. Your support means more than words can say. Please like, comment your thought, if you've experienced such before you can share to help others with similar situations too. If you have any question to ask, the community will be ready to answer all your question.